when my father decided it was time to start a new life. I thought this step would be a salvation for both of us. After we lost my mother, our house became a cold, empty place where silence filled every corner. My father said that moving to the suburbs of a big city was an opportunity to start with a clean slate. I wasn't sure about that. But like him, I hoped that the change would help us escape the darkness that had engulfed our lives. The new house looked perfect. A beautiful garden, a spacious yard, and friendly neighbors. At first glance, one might think that this place was the embodiment of peace. One of the first neighbors we met was Ellen. A woman in her 40s with a contagious smile and a lively personality. She quickly found common ground with my father. I saw how his eyes lit up when they talked. He hadn't looked so happy in a long time. And I liked it. After all, I wanted him to start living again. Ellen soon became a part of our everyday life. She invited us to barbecues, brought us food, and my father spent more and more time in her company. Naturally, I was initially wary of her. Perhaps it was because I still missed my mother and wasn't ready to let someone new into our family. But as the weeks passed, I started to get used to Ellen and even found comfort in her presence. She was attentive, always trying to support me, often asking how I was feeling. Yet, despite her efforts, something deep inside me kept pushing me toward caution. Maybe it was simply the fear of change. Or perhaps it was because I saw how quickly she filled the void left by my mother. My father, on the other hand, seemed happy. He began to smile again, laugh, and talk about plans for the future. I didn't want to ruin his happiness, so I pushed my doubts to the back of my mind. However, it soon became clear that this story wasn't as simple as it seemed. When our distant relative Nick came to stay with us, I noticed that Ellen started paying him a bit too much attention. Nick was older than me, always joking, with an easy charisma. He was close to my father, and I knew that he and Ellen could easily hit it off. But still, something about their interactions felt off to me. It was more than just friendliness. Their glances, their jokes, the way they talked. It all started to form an uncomfortable picture. Inside me, a sense of unease began to grow, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what was bothering me. I tried to ignore it because I didn't want to destroy the little bit of happiness that had returned to our home. But as it turned out, my instincts weren't wrong. A few weeks had passed since Nick started staying with us more frequently. My father always welcomed him with open arms, while I tried not to pay attention to how Ellen and Nick began acting a little too friendly. Maybe it was my jealousy, a simple annoyance that he was taking too much of my father's time. But with each passing day, their interactions grew more intense and strange. One evening, as we were preparing for dinner, Ellen suggested that Nick stay over for the night. I had never seen her so energetic and interested when it came to someone other than my father. I decided to watch them without showing that something bothered me. They often laughed together, joked, and I, like a ghost in the room, felt as if I no longer belonged to their shared company. One day I returned home earlier than usual. Ellen had said she would be cooking dinner and suggested we all visit the neighbors later. But when I entered the house, the silence was so suffocating that it made my stomach turn. I walked into the living room, and to my surprise, I saw Ellen and Nick sitting too close together on the couch. I froze for a moment, unsure whether to move, and thought that if I made a step, they would realize I was there. Their conversation was quiet, and though I couldn't hear the words, their closeness spoke more than words could. But the most shocking moment came when I noticed Ellen leaning in and quickly kissing Nick on the cheek. The kiss was brief, but everything inside me stopped. It wasn't the kind of kiss that could happen between two people who simply knew each other well. My heart was pounding so loudly that it felt like it could be heard in the room. Everything inside me screamed that something was wrong. But I couldn't move. Instead, I slowly backed out of the room and headed for the door, trying not to reveal myself. My head was spinning with thoughts. I was shocked by what I had just seen. When I got outside, I wanted to run to forget it all. But I couldn't. I stood on the porch, looking at the calm sunset, feeling everything inside me fall apart. Why would she do that? What did it mean for our home from my father? Too many questions and no answers. I couldn't just go and tell my father. I had to figure things out before taking any action. Later, I returned to the house as if nothing had happened, trying not to show that I had seen something unusual. But now I knew that what was happening between Ellen and Nick went beyond ordinary family relationships. The next day, I could no longer look at Ellen the way I used to. Every gesture, every smile, every word she spoke seemed fake to me, as if she was playing a role. And I was the only one who knew what was really happening behind the scenes. My father, however, noticed nothing. And Nick, as always, acted carefree and relaxed. All day, I felt like there was a war going on inside me. Should I tell my father? Or stay silent for now? That evening, I decided to get some fresh air and walk around the house to clear my head. Near the backyard, I spotted Nick and Ellen again. They were standing by a tree, seemingly without a care in the world. It threw me off balance. I stood behind the bushes, watching them as if it were some kind of performance I didn't want to see, but couldn't look away from. Ellen was laughing softly, and Nick leaned in too close. And before I could fully grasp what was happening, they kissed. This kiss was quick, but long enough for everything inside me to tighten. This time, it wasn't an innocent gesture. Not just friendly closeness. There was something more in that kiss. Something that confirmed all of my worst suspicions. Ellen and Nick were clearly hiding something from my father. Something that could destroy our family. My heart pounded so hard. It felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I didn't know how to react. Should I scream? I don't know. Storm in and tell them that I had seen everything. Or just run away, never to witness it again. At that moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I took a step back, trying to remain unseen, and hurried back to the house. When I finally reached my room, I sat on my bed, feeling completely shattered. Everything I had seen replayed in my mind over and over again. That kiss. Their glances. How they laughed together. It felt like my entire world had turned upside down. And I was the only one who knew. That night, I barely slept. Doubts and fear consumed me entirely. I knew that sooner or later I would have to tell my father. But how? How could I explain to him that Ellen, the woman he seemed to love, was betraying him right under his nose? How could I tell him about Nick? Someone he trusted, who was becoming part of our family. These thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. With each passing hour, the anxiety grew. And I realized that I couldn't stay silent any longer. But how could I find the right moment? Was there still any hope left that this was all just a terrible mistake? Ever since I saw that kiss, everything inside me had changed. I tried to avoid both Ellen and Nick. They acted as if nothing had happened. As if every day was normal. My father, as always, was blissfully unaware. Which only made my situation more unbearable. I tried to appear calm. But inside I was torn apart by doubt and guilt. I knew I had to decide what to do next. One evening, my father called me into his study. His tone was calm as usual, but I noticed that he seemed to be expecting a serious conversation. We sat across from each other, and he looked at me intently, as if he were about to say something important. "I've been wanting to talk to you for a while," he began, clasping his hands together on the table. "You've seemed troubled lately. Has something happened?" My heart clenched. I wasn't ready for this conversation. But in that moment I realized I had no other choice. My father was looking at me with such genuine concern that I wanted to tell him the truth. But I couldn't. At least not now. I felt that if I told him everything right this moment, then it would destroy his world. And he had just started to recover from everything that had happened with my mother. "Everything's fine," I replied, trying to sound confident, though I was trembling inside. "I've just been thinking a lot about the future." He nodded. But from the look on his face, I could tell he didn't fully believe me. My father had always been a good observer. He could sense the slightest changes in mood. But this time he didn't press further. "If you ever want to talk," he continued, "just know that I'm always here. It's important to me that you feel safe in our home." Those words hit me especially hard. Safety. Our home had always been my sanctuary. But now it had become a place where I felt like a prisoner of secrets. I wanted my father to know that I was ready to protect him. But I was afraid that telling him the truth would hurt him more than anything. After that conversation, I went to my room, feeling even more overwhelmed. Thoughts about how to tell my father the truth kept swirling in my head. I knew it was inevitable. The only question was when and how to do it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything I had seen over and over again in my mind. Why had they decided to betray my father? Why were they so easily deceiving him? As if he didn't deserve the truth? These thoughts tormented me. And I knew that soon the moment would come when I would have to make a choice. A week had passed since that evening when my father tried to talk to me. Everything inside me screamed that I couldn't keep hiding what I had learned. Every minute spent in the house was becoming unbearable. My father continued living his usual life, unaware of anything, while I walked around the house as if on the edge of a cliff, afraid of any word, look, or gesture. I decided that I couldn't stay silent any longer. I had to finally tell my father the truth. After gathering my thoughts, I waited for Nick and Ellen to leave the house. This was the perfect moment. My father was home alone. My hands trembled slightly as I went downstairs. He was sitting in the living room, watching some old movie on TV, completely unaware of the conversation we were about to have. I sat down across from him, taking a deep breath, and began to speak. "Dad, I need to tell you something. It's important." He looked at me with surprise and immediately turned off the TV, setting the remote aside. His expression became serious and I knew the time had come. I could no longer avoid the truth. I began struggling to find the right words to express what had been choking me for so long. "Ellen and Nick. They're behaving in a way they shouldn't. I saw them together. And it was more than just friendship." My father froze. In his eyes, I saw genuine confusion. Silence hung in the air, as if the entire world had stopped, waiting for his response. My heart pounded so fast it seemed like its beating could be heard in the room. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly, as if checking whether he had misheard. I nodded, unable to say anything more. Everything inside me churned. Shame. Guilt. The pain I knew I was causing him. I expected him to yell, to get angry with me, or to try to defend Ellen. But his face remained almost expressionless. He stood up from the couch and walked past me to the window, looking outside at the empty street. I could see how tense his shoulders were, how hard he was trying to hold back his emotions. I wanted to say something more, but I couldn't find the right words. The silence felt like an eternity. "I believe you," he finally said without turning around. Those words were like a heavy weight on my chest. He understood everything. He knew I was telling the truth. But how could this change anything? How could we undo what had already been done? We didn't speak again that evening. I went to my room feeling a heavy burden on my shoulders. I knew I had done the right thing. But that step left both of us at a crossroads. My father decided to talk to Ellen and Nick. But I no longer wanted to be part of that conversation. The next morning, when I woke up, the house was empty. My father had left early without leaving a note. I didn't know how he would handle it. But deep down, I felt that our life would never be the same again. The story ended, leaving my father and me alone to face the pain that had torn our home apart.